In the past few decades, especially with cell phones being available to the general public, in my opinion, the standard focal length for photography has changed from 50mm to 28mm. Let me explain why. Back in the early days of photography, whenever it just became available to the general population, 50mm was considered the kit lens or standard focal length, probably partially because it was the easiest to manufacture at that point with technology being where it was, but also because it most closely approximates the human angle of view in your vision. In my opinion, I think that the 35mm focal length more closely approximates human vision because it kind of takes into consideration your peripheral vision as well. And to me, whenever I hold up a camera compared to what I was just looking at, 35mm is more close to my actual vision, and 50mm is just a little bit more tightened in. But nonetheless, for decades, 50mm was considered the standard focal length and what humans really saw in. It wasn't for a while, with the development of zoom lenses coming along in the early days, that they were good enough to really take the place of the 50mm as a kit lens. So for a long time, just because primes are easier to manufacture, 50mm became the standard for cameras. But eventually, after decades of work and zoom lenses becoming sharper and faster, they actually overtook the 50mm field of view as the kit lens for cameras. And that's why most cameras nowadays, if they're sold with a kit lens, is either with an 18-55 or 24-105. Since then, the 50mm field of view has become kind of a show-off piece for camera manufacturers. Like a good example is Fujifilm selling the 50mm f1, which is just a crazy flex on the camera market. And I know that is the equivalent of like to a 75mm field of view, but it still is a 50mm lens physically. But especially recently, a lot of camera manufacturers have been doing interesting things with 50mm equivalents, like most notably the fantastic plastic Canon 50mm f1.8, which is probably arguably the best value lens ever made. It's what a lot of creators starting off with the Canon system would use, because it's so cheap and it's so small and it's so light, but it's still an f1.8, and the 50mm field of view is still very useful. So that's kind of where the 50mm lens has landed in more modern times. But I would argue that nowadays, where the 50mm field of view is, considering that zoom lenses have really taken over the kit aspect of, you know, a one and done lens, I think that the 50mm field of view has kind of fallen off a little bit, and then the actual standard nowadays would be 28mm, mostly because that is what cell phone cameras predominantly are. And I know there's going to be a lot of photography purists who are going to argue that this is not right or whatever, but think about it. Why was 50mm considered the standard field of view? It was partially because it's the approximation of human vision, but I kind of disagree. I think that's more like a 35mm field of view. But at the same time, if you're just trying to approximate human vision, also in my opinion, you can obviously make good things, but I think it's a little bit more interesting to use a focal length that isn't exactly how you see. That's just my preference. But the whole reason that the 50mm field of view was considered the standard was because that was what was most readily available to the public and just probably the easiest to manufacture. And all these factors came into just like that was what was available, so that's what people used. And that's the reason a lot of your favorite photographers from back in the day started with a 50mm lens, just because that's what their camera was sold with. So if you take that same concept and consider it to nowadays, what does everybody have? What is everybody supplied with when they get a cell phone? Everybody's a photographer. They have a 28 equivalent field of view main lens on their camera. Now phone cameras have multiple lenses, but the main one with the biggest and best sensor and best image quality is 99% of the time a 28mm field of view, or sometimes a 24. And I think that is a big reason why, just growing up in this generation, and I've used a cell phone for many years of my life, ever since I was pretty young, I think that's why I prefer this Fujifilm 16mm equivalent to a 24 a field of view, which is a little bit wider than what I'm saying is the new standard, because that's what's on phones. But I think that's why I'm more partial to these wide angle lenses, is because that's just, it's easier to see the world that way whenever that's what's most readily available. Obviously, this isn't a review like my usual videos are. I wanted to try something new here. It's more of a conversation. I want to see if you agree, if you disagree, or if you have like a good reason to agree or disagree, or if you even think another lens is the new standard focal length. I think this is a cool discussion, at least. And I think I've kind of heard people talk about this a little bit, but to me, it's really obvious that the 50mm field of view, which is in Fujifilm terms, this 35 1.4, I love this lens so much, but this isn't what I'd go for my all-around shoot lens, my standard lens. I would want to go with either a 16 or an 18, maybe a 23, but I would never want to go, this is too tight to me. And I know people, because that's what cameras were sold with, this is what they would be used to if they have shot photography for a long time. But where I'm at and the new generation is at, I really think that the standard is more and more going to push towards the wide angle aspect of things. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like on this video. Do you want more videos like this about the art of photography and just like my opinions on certain more niche aspects? Or do you just want me to go on with reviews? To be honest, I don't want to do that 100%. It's a little soul crushing in a way. I mean, right now I really like it, but I think over time, if I was only doing reviews, it would kind of suck. So I want to throw in, keep it fresh, keep it interesting. So leave a like on this video. Let me know what you think down below. What is the new standard focal length? Is it still 50mm? Is it 28mm? Is it 35? What do you think? All right, thanks guys. Bye.